You're listening the Virtual CISO Podcast, providing the best insight on information security and security IT advice to business leaders everywhere.
Cool. Hey there, and welcome to yet another episode of the Virtual CISO Podcast. With you, as always, your host, John Berry, and with me today, Anna Poplitz. Hey, Anna.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me.
Looking forward to this conversation. I
Me
always like to
too.
start simple. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what is that you do every day.
Yeah, so I am an engineering director and the head of passwordless at OnePassword. So I've been in security pretty much my whole career, mostly product security, cryptography, identity. And I joined OnePassword a little over 2 years ago when the company that I co-founded called Passage was acquired. And so since then, I've really just been focused on all things passwordless, like educating users, educating businesses on why they should go passwordless and how they can actually do it, and building tools to help them do it. So really all things passwordless.
And I guess people by now, I guess the topic also told that's what we're about to talk about. Before we do, I always ask, what's your drink of choice?
Ooh, I am a coffee person for sure. I feel like I've gotten more and more particular in my coffee taste over the years. I love trying new beans from our local roaster and like acquiring new coffee gadgets, things like that. Definitely a coffee person.
And how many cups have you had so far today? Because you do seem a little bit high energy. Is this the normal, Anna, or is this a
This is
X
probably
happy?
normal, Anna. This is
This is
definitely
normal.
normal. But I've had two today, and the third one's, hit or miss, depending on how the day is going.
Yeah, I don't know that you can consider yourself a coffee aficionado if you're only drinking two. Are they 24-ounce cups or 8-ounce cups?
They're definitely big, and I have one of those cups that keeps my coffee warm all day,
Oh,
which
those are
is
cool.
nice. So then I
But
can, make it last a little longer.
yeah, I have not gotten to that point yet where I've bought one of those. But this is about my fourth cup, and I still don't have the energy you do. So maybe I should be drinking the coffee you drink.
Yeah, you should try it out. I'll send you some tips.
Hey, there you go. I'm looking forward to it. All right. So, passwordless is definitely becoming a topic of conversation. Passkeys being one of the more common mechanisms for that are slowly but surely entering our lexicon. So that's really what I want to chat about today. So can you do me a favor? Would you be so kind as to define what a passkey is as a baseline for the episode?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. So, passkeys are a new way to log into apps and websites that is fully passwordless, right? So, it's more secure and more user friendly than with passwords. I think the best way, like, we can get into all the details around public key cryptography and things like that, but I think the best way to think about it is that the goal is really to remove the human error from logging into these apps and websites by giving you something where the security is just built straight into the technology. If you think about passwords, like the biggest problem is that you as the user have to like think up a good password and remember it and like make sure it's unique across all your different sites. And with passkeys, all of that happens totally automatically. It's really easy to use and you get these really great security benefits like phishing resistance. And so from a user perspective, like that's kind of abstract, right? But from a user perspective, it just looks and feels like you're unlocking your device. Probably using something like Face ID or Touch ID, Windows Hello. Like that's actually the experience that a user's having when they're using a passkey to sign into a website.
So almost in a weird way, they almost don't realize that they're actually using authentication, right? So it's almost like stress-free authentication.
Yeah, the goal is that it's so familiar and so easy that you don't really need to worry about it, and there's no, like, "Oh, let me check if this password is secure," or like, "Oh, let me check if this is a phishing website I'm typing into," right? All of that security stuff kinda goes away, and they're just touching their finger or looking at their phone, and all of it happens behind the scenes. Yeah.
So anyone that would be listening to this probably has used passwords their entire life, right? So they've served us, I think we could argue, remarkably well for a long time. But increasingly, we have change, which is making them more and more challenged, right? Password crackers mean that we need to make them longer and stronger, which makes them harder to memorize. So we end up reusing them or we end up writing them down in a place where we shouldn't. And that's led to things like credential stuffing attacks, social engineering, really business email compromise and somebody gaining someone's credentials are the root of what percentage of breaches, a significant percentage of them, right? So what problems did the passkeys specifically solve? And what is it that makes passkeys more secure than passwords?
Yeah, there's a few things. So you touched on a few of them. One is the phishing resistance, right? So phishing, social engineering, one of the most common attacks against password-based accounts, especially when you add AI into the mix. Like these messages are getting more and more realistic. People can use AI to call you and ask you for your password, right? And like impersonate your boss. And so there's just so much burden on users to check and make sure that it's okay to type their password somewhere. With passkeys, there isn't really anything to phish, and the passkey is tied to a specific domain. So any sort of like social engineering attack that uses a lookalike domain, like facebook.com with zeros instead of O's, isn't going to work. Like your passkey won't be able to be used on that site. So we immediately like eliminate a huge swath of attacks, which is really, really great. The other category you mentioned was credential stuffing. Again, like there's not really a credential to steal and use in that way, right? And so everything is public key based. So most really common credential based attacks don't really apply in this scenario. And like I mentioned before, you kind of don't have this users have to put a lot of work into generating a good passkey, right? It just happens behind the scenes. You don't have to worry about it. And I think it's really interesting because this isn't like the first time we've been like, passwords are bad, we need to fix it, right? That's been a thing for a while. And we've tried different ways to fix it. We've tried multi factor authentication, we've tried SMS login codes, like all of these different things. And they do add some security to passwords, but always at the expense of convenience or user experience in some way, right? You always have to change contacts and go to your email to look up a code, or you have to get your verification app out and do an extra step. So you're adding all of this time and energy to the login process. But with passkeys, the idea is you like get all this security, but also it's actually like faster than logging in with a password or an email link or anything like that. So you're kind of getting like the best of the both worlds. And it's kind of the first time that's ever happened, which I think is why it's kind of being talked about and really taking off right now.
So it breaks, we have that traditional iron triangle, right? You know, so you're saying ostensibly is we get it, we get all of it, right?
Exactly.
Faster,
That's my
keep better.
claim.
Faster, people better. Is that what you're telling me?
Exactly. No downsides.
Well, we'll see. Now you laid the challenge out there. Now I'm going to find the downsides. So on the so the key that we're talking about, right? Whether it's credential stuffing, which is really a password reuse problem, right? People reusing the same password across multiple domains, and someone testing that. Hey, I found your password over here. Can I use it over here? So it's them capturing your password and reusing it somewhere else. We talked about the second one, which was a credential harvesting, where people are stealing somebody's credentials and then they're using those credentials. So the idea here is that we're not able to steal passkeys. Is that really fundamental when it comes down to the bottom line as to why is this more secure? Is the passkey is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's unique per domain, and it's also difficult to impossible to steal.
Right. So it is unique per domain and per
Okay.
user and all of that,
Mhm.
and very difficult to steal is the idea. Obviously if your passkey is stored in your iCloud account or maybe it might even be stored in the TPM on a device potentially or in your OnePassword account, if that account, the provider account is compromised, sure there may be access to that private key, but that is a much higher bar of security than a password that you wrote down on a piece of paper, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so you just opened the door to the next issue, right? You use the term private key, which is probably going to scare the hell out of a couple people, right? Someone like me who's been doing this a little bit of time, PKI technology is, I mean, I don't remember what the years were, but the 2000 noughts or the early 2010s, it was every year was the year of PKI. This is the year PKI is going to go mainstream, and it never did. Really mainstream, right? Because of some of the challenges and cost and complexity to implementing it. But now passkeys fundamentally are PKI, correct?
Correct.
So let's talk a little bit about we don't want to get into a class on PKI, but explain a little bit about how PKI works at a business person's level.
Yeah. So, behind the scenes, passkeys are built on public key cryptography. Been around for a long time, the basis for a lot of other stuff. But I
Mhm.
think applying that technology here, you don't need quite as much like global infrastructure as you do in maybe a traditional PKI world. So, you know, to kind of apply it to passkeys, right? When a user creates an account on a website, a unique public key is created and stored on that website's server, while
Mhm.
a private key is stored on the user's device or in their iCloud or OnePassword account. That private key never leaves the user's device or device account, and it's then used to like cryptographically sign a challenge that is verified using the public key that the website has.
Mhm.
So the public key is, of course, public. The website has it. They actually don't have any sort of secret that could be stolen in, a large breach of their database, which is another cool security benefit, right? They don't have a list
You
of hashed
you
passwords, right? That
you
doesn't apply.
Right.
Um, that private key is, like protected in your device or your highly secure provider account. And I think there's sort of this like, it's been talked about a lot of like, can we use something like this to apply to passwords? And actually, like, the underlying technology for passkeys is called WebAuthn. It's actually been around for maybe, like, 10 years, but it was mostly limited to things like hardware keys, like YubiKeys, and the credentials were not portable at all, which is where the really strong security came from, right? You have this key stored in a TPM on a device. And
Mhm.
so, like, technology was really cool, but it just wasn't really usable for the average consumer. There's no fallback or recovery process. So it really only made sense in like an enterprise context. And then a few years ago, passkeys emerged as they sort of exist today, where providers or platforms like Google, Apple, or OnePassword could actually like store and then sync your WebAuthn credentials across all of your devices using your iCloud account, your Google account, your OnePassword account. And so this change kind of made passkeys way more accessible and like actually usable in a consumer context. And I think that's why you're suddenly hearing about it in the last few years of like, this is a technology that's actually usable by regular people because realistically, like people aren't just gonna like go buy a YubiKey to use to log into their Amazon account, right? Like that's probably not realistic. And so we kind of had to like take this public key infrastructure and this protocol of WebAuthn and really like adapt it to be more usable in a consumer context.
Gotcha. And from a comfort level, I think for most people, this mechanism that we're using is the same mechanism that we use for HTTPS and TLS. And I mean, it's the same math is going on. And realistically, we've been using this now for, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years,
Yeah.
whatever the number is, right? And presuming that, the private keys are protected well, we know this is a fundamentally proven, valid, non-broken, at least yet, mechanism. So quick
Yeah.
question to that end, if I'm using an Amazon passkey, and Amazon does support passkey now as I understand it. If I'm using an Amazon passkey, is it using the same public key that it does to, for the website so I know that I'm talking to Amazon? Or is it a secondary set of credentials that it's using for the passkey?
So every user on every website is going to have a different key pair, a
Mhm.
different set of credentials. There are in different contexts, there's going to be different levels of verification you might expect. Like in a consumer environment, you can use any key. It can be from OnePassword, it can be from iCloud, it could be like you don't really care. In really high assurance use cases or an enterprise use case, you might actually want additional levels of verification that we can provide. Like, I only want my users to use passkeys from OnePassword, say. That's going to be like a control that I put in place in my organization. And so you can actually, there's a lot of sort of flexibility in where the keys come from and who is allowed to have them and what levels of verification you want to do on top of that. But I think your fundamental point is correct that like the technology has been around for a long time. And the idea of like passkeys being new and therefore being scary or maybe unproven doesn't really apply here. And that it is certainly separate from like your HTTPS TLS infrastructure, right? There's going to be a separate like authentication layer of credentials.
Gotcha. Yeah, what I was referring to is like, is the public key that's being used for the passkey the same public key that's being used to authenticate the
Oh,
website? No, different.
no,
Okay.
it'd be different. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And then getting back to what you just talked about. So, um, underneath the covers, right? I mean, at the end of the day, a passkey is a digital certificate, I'm assuming, right?
It's just a public key or a private key, right?
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Which is technically a digital
Yeah.
cert, right?
Mhm.
Like, is it X509 or like one of the standards, or is it something unique? Do you know?
Yeah, everything is standard. There's a lot of different algorithms that can be supported, depending on the website, and things are evolving over time to support new algorithms, things like that. Yeah.
Okay. And then so what's happening is it's giving me effectively a small digital file, right? That is going to be kept somewhere. So I can, like when I do Windows Hello, I'm assuming that file is being kept on that local either hard drive or in the TPM. By the way, TPM stands for the people listening.
Trusted something module.
Okay. I didn't know what the P was either. I would have defined it and thought I looked really smart.
Like secure enclave, something like that.
I'm thinking T, protection, identity. Okay. So anyway, there's a place on here. It's a special thing called a
It's a
TPM.
special place.
This special place, and the special part, it begins with P, and we can't think of it. But the TPM, so typically, I guess on a regular machine, it's being stored there. Now, one of the things I did want to ask you, right, is you work for OnePassword. OnePassword making a big push into the fact that you guys are able to store these as well. So that would allow us this ability that where I could move from machine to machine and still log into my Amazon account with my passkey.
Exactly. So this was very much like one of the challenges early on was you're so stuck in one device with a passkey that how do you then, like, none of us just use one device, right? I have a phone, I have a laptop, I have a tablet. And so how do I actually use a passkey all those places? Well, I do have my OnePassword account on all of those devices, right? That's how I get my credentials in different places. Obviously, you could use another password manager, or you could just use your iCloud account or something like that. But I think the usability aspects of being able to sync any of your credentials, whether it's passwords or passkeys, like vastly outweighs the fact that now we have to store those credentials in those services, right? But we're all so focused on security and end-to-end encryption and things like that we're making sure to provide that level of security.
Gotcha. And one of the massive advantages to HTTPS, and one of the reasons why it's pervasive, is it's transparent to us, right? Our browser, like when I go to log into Amazon, whether I'm using password or passkeys, the browser does a lookup and validates with my private key, that public key. It knows I'm talking to Amazon, and yes, I'm going to pass it my credentials. But it all happens without me being aware of it. So the same process effectively happens with a passkey. I go to log into Amazon, and I don't really have to type in a password anymore because it sees that I'm trying to auth. It recognizes that I've got a passkey credential, and that same validation and authentication process takes place transparent to me. So it looks like I'm no longer using passwords when I go to Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. I think HTTPS is such a good example of this. Like the security is just built into the technology, right?
Mhm.
That's such a good example. And so the goal with passkeys is the same. Like you'll go to Amazon, you'll click a login button, and then you'll have to do a prompt to say like, do your Touch ID or unlock your OnePassword vault, something like that.
Mhm.
But the idea is you don't have to like take a security action outside of that, right? You don't have to type in a password, or if you're creating an account on Amazon, right? You don't have to think up that password or be like, okay, is this actually Amazon.com, or is the O switched with the 0 and this is like a lookalike site I need to be aware of? And so it takes all of that like thought process you have to do out of the equation, much like your browsers do with HTTPS now.
Gotcha. Now, if
Mhm.
I had a highly privileged account, let's say my retirement account, am I able to layer multi-factor authentication using Microsoft Authenticator or Duo or Okta or something of that nature as well? Can I have MFA layered on top of passkeys?
Definitely. It's really kind of up to the website's implementation, but that is a very common thing to do right now for sure. What I'm seeing a lot of really high assurance websites do is first roll out passkeys as a form of multi-factor authentication. So you might still have a password or maybe an SMS code or something like that, and then passkeys as that additional factor to provide additional assurance. And so for things like, banking or things like that, you may want multiple forms of authentication just to be sure, and they're doing all this risk on the back end. But then for things like, your Amazon account, maybe you don't mind as much and you're fine with just the ease of logging in, right? Yeah, so it's very customizable but it's ultimately probably a decision for the website and what they want to support.
Gotcha. And then, so, like on one of my machines, I'm using Windows Hello. Is that so? When I log on, I put in a simple code, 4 6 digit code. I can't remember what it is right now. Is that a an example of multi-factor? Because it's the certificate is stored on the TPM within that machine, and then the second factor is the unique ID that I'm putting in at that point.
In passkey terms, we think about that. We call it user verification. So it's essentially verifying that it is actually you, John, at that computer, because you typing in your PIN or using your Face ID or whatever is really like unlocking access to that private key. And so it is sort of a second factor in a sense, but
In
we
a
call it
sense,
more
but
of a
not
user
the
verification
traditional,
step.
right? I
Mhm.
got you. I
Yeah.
mean, it is really a second factor, right? It's something else that because otherwise, what you're saying is that somebody else sitting down at that same computer would have the same level of access as you, because
Exactly. Yes.
much the same way with PKI. If someone has your private key, they're you.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so this sounds pretty damn good so far. So there must be some challenges that come along with this, right? So what are the challenges, and how do you solve them? Like, so before we got on here, like one of the things I was going to talk about was access to multiple devices. I know early on in Passkeys, that was a little bit of a problem. And then smart people like OnePassword came along and said, hey, no, we can solve that problem for you. What about things like brick devices? What happens if my machine crashes and now I no longer have access to my private key? So let's talk about like some of the gotchas and how, what they are and how we solve them.
Yeah, I think account recovery is for sure a big question we get a lot, right? Like this, if my device is bricked or I lose it or I, for whatever reason, just don't have access to one or all of my devices, like what do I do, right? How do I recover these passkeys when it's not something I could have just written down on a piece of paper somewhere and have access to that? And honestly, it's not all that different from anything we have now. I think it's kind of a joint ownership over this problem between the providers, the place where you're storing your passkey, and the website, right? So providers like OnePassword or Apple or Google can provide you ways to recover your iCloud account and to make sure you have access to those credentials. And at the same time, the website, like an Amazon, can also provide ways for you to recover your account in the event that you lose your credentials. And so I understand the concern, but it's really like, can we do better than what we have today? And I think we're still kind of working through the best ways of account recovery, but it's not nearly as bad as it was a few years ago when everything was tied to a device. And if you lose that device, you are just like totally out of luck. Now the provider can actually play a role in helping you recover your credentials, which I think makes the story much better than putting all of the onus on the user to have two YubiKeys, for all of their websites, which isn't really reasonable, or on the website to do the recovery. So a lot of that, we're kind of still like working through a lot of that. I think that's a pretty common challenge. What you'll see with most websites who have passkey support is that they still support passwords, right? They are not actually fully getting rid of passwords. Most commonly, it's sort of an option. And I think part of that is that passkeys are still kind of new to people. And so they want to roll them out slowly and not surprise users with something they've never heard of. But I also think part of that is learning what works well for account recovery, what challenges do people run into with passkeys that maybe we didn't anticipate? How can we make the user experience better? And so they're rolling it out slowly over time to make sure they can sort of see the benefits of passkeys without dealing with a lot of like churn for customers. And I
I would
think that's
think that,
kind of the other like challenge I see is really just like awareness and adoption. Like there are a lot of people who still don't know about passkeys and a lot of businesses who have an opportunity to improve their business with passkeys, but just don't really know or understand the technology. And so, it's a lot of education and awareness still to make sure that people see that it's here and it's ready and it's exciting and, they should give it a try.
Um, would passkey recovery conceptually follow the already reasonably well proven password recovery mechanisms? I mean, is it going to be that, we know some secrets about you, your high school mascot and your first child's name or whatever the dumb things that we do, or, recovery email address, your recovery phone number. Because at the end of the day, in one case where, we're storing your password on our server so you can come back, which I agree with you is probably one of the best values of passkeys, is because we can put "Have I been pawned?" Will no longer be as important as it is right now. And it's really just a matter of, instead of me storing a copy of your password locally, I'm generating a new certificate for you and delivering that to you. The delivery part's easy because we can do that through HTTPS. So it's really just a matter, as long as I can authenticate that you are who you are, it's really shouldn't be that much different than password recovery, correct?
Yeah, I think account recovery is definitely kind of like the weak link in the sense that right now it's kind of just whatever already existed with passwords, right? Ideally, that also changes in the future, but I think that is still a challenge with passkeys of like how can passkeys somehow make that account recovery process better? And I don't think
Mhm.
there's a great answer for that right now, but it's something I'm really interested in thinking about and like figuring out, because I think that is still, if your primary authentication becomes really secure, then the weak link obviously becomes recovery,
Yeah,
as much as
recovery.
it is now even, right?
Yes,
And
it,
so
yeah,
I think that's still a very interesting problem that isn't 100% solved, but we're working on it. We'll see.
all right. Well, solve that for me, please.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, this sounds really cool, I'd like to mess around with it. How does somebody go about that process of saying, "Hey, I'm going to start to use passkeys"?
Yeah,
Now,
so if you
let's talk about individually first, and
okay,
then let's talk about the SMB case second, right? So if I'm
cool.
a consumer, how do I start using passkeys?
Yeah, that sounds great. So, from a user perspective, I would start with apps and websites that you already use today that support passkeys. Google, Amazon, Target all support passkeys. And so, I would really encourage you to like go to your accounts on those websites and set them up. We actually at OnePassword we have this directory called passkey.directory that lists all the sites that we know about that currently support passkeys. I think it's like over 200 now. It's more than doubled just in the last year. And so surely I'm sure everyone uses at least one of those 200 sites that are on there, and you can go and just kind of like see and try it out. I really think once you kind of have that first experience as a user, you're going to be like, "Oh, I get it. Like this is really cool." And I think like seeing it in action really kind of causes that aha moment for people. So I'd really encourage that. If you're a OnePassword user, you'll be able to like save and fill your passkeys directly from like your OnePassword app or extension, just like you do with passwords or anything else right now. And same if you're a Google or an Apple user and you use their password managers, it'll all look and feel very, very similar to what you do with passwords today.
All right, so let's go the same question. So I'm running a 100-person organization that is Microsoft 365, like most 100-person organizations are. How do I start using, as a business? Because this sounds great. How do I start using passkeys?
Yeah. So most of your providers like Microsoft with O365 or something probably support passkeys already. And so if you are like an admin for that organization, you can probably go in and turn on passkey support for something like O365. Um Again, there is very much this like prerequisite that websites have to do work in order to support passkeys, right? Like you as a user cannot just go start using a passkey on any website. And so I think it's really one thing that, I'm really passionate about is like the developers and the businesses and how we get them more websites to actually support passkeys so that people can actually start using them, right? That's what That's what Passage, my company before OnePassword, did, and that's what I'm still doing at OnePassword. It's all about, like adding passkey support alongside of whatever you have already, because I really think like the only way to get true adoption is to tackle the problem from both sides, right? So like from the OnePassword perspective, we're saying we can help businesses implement passkeys because honestly, it's a lot harder than passwords. There's a lot more like nuance to how you implement it. And as a password manager, we can also help users manage their passkeys. And so, we can kind of meet in the middle where both parties are really incentivized to use passkeys.
Quick question for you. So
Mhm.
so if I'm, let's say, using Microsoft 365 and I start using passkeys, do I really need to worry about whether all of the SaaS apps that as long as they support single sign-on, right? I mean, the reality is that once they've got the credential that says I am me, right? From I'm I don't know if it's still a Kerberos ticket and all the old
Sure.
stuff that I used to know when I had some technical credibility. But at the end of the day, I come to the next website and I pass along a ticket and say, "Hey, Mr. Website Conductor, I'm allowed to ride this train." And I get on the train and I don't really need to worry if that website uses passkeys, right? So in theory, right, I can take advantage of passkeys on any application that I'm already doing single sign-on with, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think if
Okay.
you're I would start with your, O365, your Okta account, whatever that is, and it's really cool in enterprise. Most of those products probably have controls you can add where you can specify specific types of providers or authenticators that are allowed to be used. You can really add a lot of security. If you want to distribute YubiKeys to all of your employees, you can, and you can make sure they're always using YubiKeys. Or you can be a little more open and be like, as long as it's one of the providers that we list or know about, that's okay. Passage by OnePassword is more intended for like consumer product applications, like product companies who are building
Mhm.
applications for the general public who say like, we use this thing at internally. It'd be really cool if we could offer passkeys to our users, right? In like scenarios where single sign-on doesn't make sense. But yeah, internally, I would prioritize your sort of front gate IDP
Right.
layer for sure.
Right. Okay. So that implies that passkeys like a directory like I guess it's Entra now can actually support it. Doesn't have to necessarily be a website, right?
Right.
At any okay. Okay. And then okay, that makes sense to me. So you hear about the FIDO Alliance.
Yes.
No, actually, I know what I wanted to ask you before that. Let's go back to the UbiKey for a second, right? So
Sure.
UbiKey is a hardware device that plugs into a USB token, and I guess the TPM, which the P we're still trying to figure out what that.
We'll never know.
We'll never know. Just trust it. It's that secret. It's that good at keeping secrets that they don't even tell you what the P stands for. So so it stores so effectively what we're doing is we're storing the passkey on this physical device at that point, right? Why do people use YubiKeys? Like, what's the advantage of actually doing it that way as opposed to storing it locally or storing it in OnePassword?
Yeah, so I think so YubiKeys have been around for a while, right? And they are certainly the most portable version of a passkey in some sense, where you're able to like take a physical thing, plug it into any computer and use it. So they are actually pretty portable in that way. The problem, of course, is if you lose one, then there's not a great recovery story the way there is with like synced passkeys. Well, YubiKeys are, I think, so powerful in an enterprise world where you really want like management of uh, the keys and the credentials. They provide a lot of like management of those keys. They've also are much more mature in those areas where synced passkeys aren't really there quite yet with a lot of the like management. I hope that one day they are, and you can get a lot of the same capabilities as an IT admin that you get with YubiKeys today in a passkey that's stored in a software provider. It's just that we're not quite there yet, but I would hope that someday we are.
Gotcha. And then I mentioned briefly the FIDO Alliance. Tell me a little bit about like what the FIDO Alliance is for people that are interested in learning more about passkeys.
Yeah, the FIDO Alliance it's really cool. It's an open industry group that is focused on reducing our uh, reliance on passwords, and they do this by promoting the like development and the use of standards like passkeys. So it includes members from all over the world. It includes websites of all different types and platforms and credential providers like OnePassword. And it's really cool to get to be a part of this and like collaborate with all these different companies and find ways to like drive adoption of passkeys and improve passkey technology. There's been a lot of cool stuff that's come out in the last, even just in the last year, right? They have this really great new resource called Passkey Central. That's an implementation reference. We have started on a new specification that is for encrypted import and export of credentials. I don't know if it's sort of a side tangent, but if you wanted to say like transfer your change password managers, right? Like move your passwords from one to another. The way you would currently do that is you download like a plain text CSV of all your passwords, right? And then upload it to another one. And so this import export format is an encrypted version of that allows you to transfer or share credentials between different providers, like end-to-end encrypted, fully secure. And I think it's such a cool example of, this was driven by passkeys and a requirement to not have those private keys be downloaded in a CSV, but it'll also apply to every other type of credential. So we're also just like making the rest of the ecosystem more secure because of something that was driven by a passkey requirement. Just a fun side tangent if you didn't know that about password managers.
Nope. No,
but
I literally had when we were acquired last year and we had to move off the password manager we use into a new one. And that was exactly the process. And I'm like, I know
it's crazy.
file with every, like, I
Yeah.
don't
And so
understand. I'm no longer an admin in my own desktop, but I can't secure shred this file. Like,
yeah.
what do I do?
Yeah. And so I'm just really excited that all of these changes are coming and are being driven by Passkeys and by the FIDO Alliance. So there's a lot of cool stuff that they're working on. I would highly encourage if you work at a business that, is interested in Passkeys, wants to learn, wants to contribute, like you should learn more for sure. I definitely recommend it.
So I'm trying to figure out if I should give you a second chance here. So you could either look really good or really bad. So I'm going to give you a second chance.
Second chance on what?
You have to answer the question first.
All right. Yeah. Hit me.
What is FIDO? Stick.
Oh, okay. Fast Identity Online. I do know that one.
was it the point? If you not know what the D was,
That's fair.
bad. People would have been like, "Yeah, OnePassword off the list, man." I mean,
yeah, we would definitely have to edit that one out.
All right. Did we miss anything?
Ooh, let's see. I think I would love to share, I think, a little bit about like adoption. I think it's been like the last year has been really cool to see the amount of like adoption that's happened. OnePassword has hit some pretty exciting milestones to close out the year that we shared recently. We've had over 4 million passkeys saved in OnePassword, and we have over 2.1 million passkey authentications per month right now. And I think like what's exciting to me is that it's not just that websites are adding support for passkeys, which is great and important. And we have this whole list of 200, websites, and that's great. But if users aren't actually using them, that doesn't matter, right? And so I think it's cool that these stats really show that people are actually choosing passkeys over passwords. And I think that's what's really going to drive adoption and excitement and other websites to go add support, is like proving that people are actually using it. It's not just the technology's there, but people aren't really choosing it. So I think that's what's been most exciting for me this year, and I'm just like really excited to see what happens next year.
Cool. And what makes, I'll give you, what makes OnePassword like, if someone's listened to this and said, all right, she didn't know what the P stood for, but other than that, she seemed pretty smart. So maybe OnePassword's a good product. Why should people consider like using OnePassword versus other password managers? It's including, right? You mentioned a couple of times, hey, this now Apple's got some kind of password manager. Google's got some kind of password manager. Why should people be looking at OnePassword specifically? Like, what's your special sauce?
I think there's two things. One is like user experience and convenience. We've always emphasized our usage as like a productivity tool, not just a security tool. And we will work in any ecosystem, right? So I have an Android phone and a MacBook. And so like those are not really the same ecosystem. And so 1Password is really well designed for a scenario where you use all sorts of different devices. We also have a very strong security model that is not just based on a single credential. We have like a device machine generated key as well. Everything is end to end encrypted. So 1Password itself even has no access to your credentials ever, even in the event that we were to be breached or something like that. And so I think our security model and our usability really set us apart.
That's cool. Awesome. So if folks want to get in contact with yourself or somebody there to chat about what you guys are doing over there,
Yeah, you're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn or just email me, anna.poplitz@onepassword.com, and check out like onepassword.com, Passkeys directory for kind of the latest updates on passkey things. I'm hoping there's some pretty cool announcements in 2025.
Awesome. Well, thank you. This has been helpful. I think it's a really cool topic. I'm glad I was able to finally get someone smart on the chat about it. So thanks.
Yeah, it was really great to be here. It's my favorite thing to talk about.